Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srila Prabhupada ki. Salam Yatra ki. Or Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So first of all, I'd like to thank your temple leaders here, wherever you are. But I'd like to thank you all for inviting me to come. Of course, naturally, this is the first time I've been to Salem. Whenever I've been telling people I'm coming to Salem, then they think that it's somewhere in America. Because there's a famous witch hunting that took place there. Some ladies were captured and burnt, and then it turned out they were innocent. So Salem got a bad name from that, and I was surprised to see in India that they've got a Salem, but the activities are completely different, of course. Okay, so for the next, 6 days, we'll be talking about Srila Prabhupada. I have a diary that I kept when I was fortunate enough to travel with Prabhupada from late 1975 through till March of 1977. And from that diary, then I've compiled the entries by, not chronologically, but by activity. So I have about 8 or 9 different seminars which describe different aspects of Srila Prabhupada's character and teachings. So what we'll do is I have a little introduction, and then after that we'll see what you all would like to hear, what topic, chanting, prasadam, deities, like that. There's about 9 different topics that I've taken all the little incidences and exchanges that we had. The idea is that after Srila Prabhupada left the planet in 1977, then I had this diary that I'd been keeping for nearly a year and a half. So I thought it would be good to publish that, because devotees, regular devotees, didn't get the same opportunity that the secretaries and servants had in seeing Srila Prabhupada up close. Generally speaking, whenever Prabhupada came to the temple, then there'd be some, of course, greeting, like this morning. I was very happy to. It reminded me of the old days when Prabhupada used to arrive at a temple and hundreds of devotees would converge there. Anyway, the idea is that I thought that whatever experiences that we'd had traveling with Prabhupada and serving him close up, that should be made available to all the rest of the devotees. It's not meant to be captured by just a few personalities. And when I first joined Prabhupada's party, that was in late 1975 in New Delhi. Prabhupada was visiting there, and for whatever reasons, highly unusual, he did not have a personal servant with him. There were 4 other devotees that had served Prabhupada in that capacity, who were in India at that time when Prabhupada came up to Delhi, but for different reasons, none of them were available. Upendra was one. He was just about to leave for Fiji. And then Nitai Das was another one. He had been Prabhupada's Sanskrit and Bengali editor for his books, who's well respected. And then there was Nanda Kumar, who had been with Prabhupada in 1971. He had kind of drifted away a little bit. And Prabhupada gave him sannyas and sent him to Africa with Bhaktivedanta Swami. And who was the other one? It'll come to me, I hope. Anyway, Harikesh was on the party. He was cooking. and transcribing Prabhupada's Bhagavatam dictations. But there was nobody there who was available to do Prabhupada's massages. So I just happened to float in from Vrindavan, where I had been the temple commander there. And I had come into Delhi on private business the day that Prabhupada arrived back. And the next morning, because Gopal Krishna Maharaj had asked me to be Prabhupada's door guard. He wanted somebody there that could filter the people as they're coming and going. He didn't want anybody just kind of rolling up there and walking in. So he asked me if I would sit outside Prabhupada's door all day. And I thought, oh, this is fantastic. Because as I was saying, when Prabhupada travelled around, often you never got to see him except on the Vyasa. So maybe on a morning walk, if you were really lucky, you could be one of those chosen men or ladies that could go on a morning walk. But in general, devotees didn't get a chance to see Prabhupada in his rooms. We never knew what was happening there. Morning program and evening program, and then the rest of the day Prabhupada was kind of hidden from view, let's say. So anyway, when I started massaging, then I thought, this is an amazing opportunity. You're not going to get this chance in many lifetimes to actually, what to speak about even touch, what to speak about his doing his massage, just even touching it was, kind of like the highlight of my whole life. So anyway, somehow or another, Prabhupada didn't have a servant with him, and I was outside the door. So he was discussing in the morning on the 26th of November, 1975, who should do his massage. And Prabhupada had seen me sitting outside the door, naturally. And Harikesh, he was his confidant. So he was doing his best to persuade him not to pick me. Because as the temple commander in Vrindavan from July, August, September of 75, that was the temple had just opened at that time. And there were, I was the temple commander, and there were a couple of incidences where I stepped out of line. I got in a physical fight with one visiting Bengali young man, and there were, on the whole, we were a pretty ramshackle bunch. We weren't well trained. I'd just come to India when Prabhupada came, so I didn't know how to act or behave, in India. I had no understanding of the culture, and especially in Vrindavan. So somehow or another, Prabhupada decided that I should massage him. And from that, which was supposed to be just doing his massage for 3 or 4 days, after that, Prabhupada was going to go in early December to Vrindavan again, and somebody else had been chosen to do that service. So initially it was going to be 4 days, but during those 4 days I got a chance to travel with Prabhupada to Kurukshetra. I'd never been there before, and I'd never traveled with Prabhupada before, so that was a wonderful event. And when we returned from Kurukshetra, then Prabhupada went back to Vrindavan for about 12 days. So when we got to Vrindavan, I was supposed to go to Calcutta. Gopal Krishna had decided that we needed a new temple president in Calcutta, and I was going to be it. So that was kind of, in those days, ISKCON India was very small in a lot of respects. And practically speaking, you could just kind of drift into a temple and you'd have been immediately made temple commander or pujari or even temple president. It was a bit like the Wild West. We really didn't know that much, but you had to make do with what you've got. So I was definitely in that category. Very rough and ready. But although I had this incident which Prabhupada had to finalize himself earlier in the year, somehow or another, he asked me to do his massage. So I did that for 3 or 4 days. Then we went back to Vrindavan. I was supposed to go on the next train to Calcutta. And there was one French sannyasi, his name is Pratiputra. So he'd been in the temple since it opened in New Vrindavan. And so he was still there when Prabhupada came. And Hari Kesha made an arrangement that now you have to swap over and let Pratiputra do the massage. So I was happy enough. I'd gone 4 days doing something I could never believe could have occurred. And I was super happy with it. But I accepted that, we're there to serve Prabhupada's needs, not our own. So I didn't mind being sent somewhere else, because I would not have been the kind of person that would have become a successful temple president in Calcutta. I didn't know anything. And I'd never been any good at learning languages. I could only speak English. Anyway, so somehow or another when we got to Vrindavan and Hari Kesha told Srila Prabhupada now, Pratiputra's going to do the massage, Prabhupada got angry. And he said, no, why are you changing? He said, if you make a change that affects me, it's my service. And he said, he's doing good, so let him continue. And not only that, he said, give him now the full servant's duties. 24/7, as we say nowadays. So, Hari Kesha was a bit glum. I was in ecstasy. And Pratiputra actually was a brahmachari at that time. He was given a sannyas after a couple of days during that visit and sent out preaching. Anyway, so we were in Vrindavan. I got this unique opportunity, and I thought on the first night, what happened the first day, Upendra was still there, and he was leaving the next day for Fiji. So on that first day of my being on the party, he told me to come in the afternoon and see how I did, or to see how to do Prabhupada's massage. He would have a full body massage at noon, using mustard oil on his body and sandalwood oil on his head. And then Upendra told me to return in the evening, and Prabhupada had a second massage, which I didn't even know was going on. We all knew about Prabhupada's noon massage, many people had seen it, but very few people knew that Prabhupada took a second massage in the evening about 10 o'clock. And that would just be like his thighs, calves and feet. That was just to keep the blood flowing, because the rest of the night, 3 or 4 hours, he would sit and translate. So just to keep his muscles from, going stiff and whatever, he had this second massage. So Upendra told me, now you come back at 9 o'clock and I'll show you how to do the evening massage. So I came back, and it was a kind of totally different world. All the guests had gone, Prabhupada was relaxing in his room, and Hansadutra had just flown in from Germany to be the Prabhupada's GBC secretary, personal secretary for 1 month. And Hari Kesha, as I said, was there cooking and doing the transcribing, so it was a neat little group. And Prabhupada was very relaxed. It wasn't at all like we saw him on the Vyasasan. When he was up on the Vyasasan, it was very formal. And even if you got on the morning walk, you could ask a few questions, but again, it was very formal. But being in his room at the end of the day, when everybody's gone to sleep, that was special. Sometimes he would relax and just doze off, have a quick nap before he started to work on his books. Or sometimes he took his massage and then got up again and went straight to his translation work. But the men that were on the party, we had a unique opportunity to be very close up with Srila Prabhupada. Of course, I was also very aware, and Prabhupada mentions this in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, I think, that the personal servants of the deities and the spiritual master, they have to be very, very careful, because if there's a fire, if you get the right distance, you can get warmed up. But if you get too close, you get burnt. So you have to be very careful how you deal with, the Guru and the Vaishnavas. Make sure you don't get burnt. So I was kind of aware of that, and very cautious of it. But it was an opportunity that was unbelievable. So I went in that first night. Prabhupada got up after a few minutes. He went into his bedroom. Upendra followed him and signaled for me to follow him. And then as Prabhupada relaxed, it was one of those string beds, what do you call them? What do you call it? The mattress is made from string. And there's this proper name for that. Anyway, it was one of those kinds of mattresses, quite simple. And there was a cotton mattress on top of that. So Prabhupada laid down and closed his eyes. And then Upendra started to show me how to massage his legs and feet. And then he told me, he said, now, sometimes Prabhupada falls asleep whilst you're doing his massage. He said, the first time I did this was in 1967. So Upendra was, went way back to the beginning of the movement, and he had served Prabhupada for some time as his personal servant. So he said, this particular night was his first night massaging. And he said that Prabhupada closed his eyes and seemed to be asleep. So he thought, okay, that's done. I'll go now and leave Prabhupada to rest. So he just got to the door, and then Prabhupada's voice came out of the darkness. Oh, you were finished? So he said I had to go back and do it, keep on going. He said, so the evening massage, you have to keep going until Prabhupada tells you to stop. Whereas with the afternoon massage, he did have a kind of a schedule. He would start for 10 minutes on Prabhupada's head, then he'd move around, do Prabhupada's chest and belly, then do his right arm, then move around, do his left arm, left leg, and then right leg. So there was a kind of a routine, and there was 10 minutes for this one, 5 minutes for that one, 15 minutes for like that. But the evening massage was different. You were in an environment like this, not as bright, quite dark, and it was very stuffy. We put a big mosquito net over Prabhupada's bed, and he slept under that. So for him, it was great. He loved hot weather, but for us, as soon as we got on there, at least for me anyway, I'd start massaging, and Prabhupada would maybe sometimes fall asleep, and you were on your own, except there's you and your mind. That's all. And you had to keep on going until Prabhupada told you to stop. So sometimes you'd be massaging away, and it's the end of the day, like 10:30 at night. Everybody else is asleep. Prabhupada's asleep, and there's just you there. And somehow or another you have to keep on going. So sometimes you'd be massaging, and then and then suddenly you'd click back again, and you wouldn't know whether you'd been out for 5 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it was. Anyway, but that evening massage, so the first time I saw Upendra do it, I thought, well, this one's easy. It's only 10 minutes. Later on, a few months later, when we were in Mayapur, it was going up to 2 hours. So it turned out to be quite difficult, actually. Anyway, so I watched Upendra do the massage, and then at about 10 o'clock, Prabhupada sent us out. He just gave a and that was it, that was the signal. So then we left. Harikesh made sure that I was out the door, we locked it. So come back tomorrow. So I came out, and even though it was so late, because you all know anyway, but the shops, a lot of shops were still open. A lot of little shops. Well, the place that we had at that time was Toddamal Lane, and that was just near Connaught Circus. So it was like in the centre of Delhi, but it was a little dead-end road where we had our temple. And there was a railway line there. So I came out and I saw there was one small new janitor bookstore. So I went there and I saw he had some blank school, college pads, notepads and stuff. So I thought, this is such an opportunity. I should write things down, but otherwise, I'll forget them. I want something in 10 years or 20 years' time, I'll be able to take that out and read it and remember all the little details. So somehow or another, by Krishna's arrangement and mercy, I got this idea to keep a diary. Then, of course, as my tenure as the servant extended and extended, then I kept on writing. After a while, I realized this is not just for me. Initially, I was writing it just for me. But then I thought later on that Prabhupada, his position, the personality, we're never going to see anything like him again. So I should write down things very carefully, or as efficiently as they could, so that devotees in the future will get a chance to know and understand Prabhupada beyond just the formality of writing his books and being on the Vyasa, but as an incredibly spiritual personality. And you can learn a lot of things from just studying Prabhupada's character and how he dealt with things. Because I see now, even 40 years later, all the same problems that we were dealing with in the 70s when Prabhupada was on the planet, we're still dealing with them now. Maybe different places, different people, but the issues that come up are very similar all the time. Of course, this kind is growing like anything. We've got, somebody said over 600 centres now. In Prabhupada's time, at least when I was with him, there was probably about 90. So we've, expanded tremendously. And the dynamics of the movement have changed considerably. Now we do a lot of, most of our preaching is being done with congregations. But in the 70s, we never had any congregations, just a few people, that was all. And the only thing mainly that people did was when they joined, you were out on the street the next day selling books. Or, we had chanting parties. So that was it, that was our whole. And Prabhupada started introducing deity worship in about 1969 with Radhamund and Ishwan, they were the first ones. So there was the temple, and then there was the Sankirtan activity, and that was it. Nowadays, with a lot of our temples, that is not the case. There's not that many people going out selling Prabhupada's books, even though he said it's the most dear thing to him and the most, much needed activity to distribute this knowledge to everybody and anyone. So anyway, I was shown the ropes by Upendra, and the next day when I came into Prabhupada's rooms at 11 in the morning, Upendra had his suitcase packed up, he got his ticket for Fiji, and he had come to get Prabhupada's blessing. Prabhupada gave him a garland, gave some encouraging words. He jumped into a scooter, what do you call them? Those three-wheelers.
Auto rickshaw.
Yeah, auto rickshaw. Bajaj. We used to call them Bajaj, but that's the make. Anyway, he jumped into his auto rickshaw off to Palam Airport. No, sorry, not Palam. The New Delhi Airport. What was the name? Indira Gandhi Airport or something. Anyway, off he went. And as soon as he walked out the door, Prabhupada looked at me and so, he kind of waggled his head. So, let's go. So that was it. I was up on the roof, Prabhupada sitting on a mat. And, I had never done a massage in my life. I'd never massaged anyone, not to speak about Prabhupada. I was pretty kind of nervous. But I thought if I'm going to get the chance to do this service, I'm going to take as much advantage as I can. So I subdued my nervousness and got to work with the service. And it went quite well. Just one little thing that happened right at the beginning of the massage, which I hadn't been warned about, and I had no idea was coming. I had never done a massage, so my fingers, as soon as I touched Prabhupada and started massaging his head, my finger joints started to stiffen up because they weren't used to being used like that. So after a couple of minutes, I was getting to a point my hands were hurting so much. I thought, this is terrible. I'm gonna have to stop if this continues. And I was really so determined not to lose the chance. So I just started to pray to Krishna within going, please, Krishna, let me do this service. I really want to do this. And after about a half a minute, all the joints in my fingers suddenly loosened off, became completely flexible again. And I went on, and of course Prabhupada was apparently none the wiser. So I managed to get through that first massage. There was one mistake that I made, was that Prabhupada always used to like to bathe using brass buckets. He didn't like showers. He always bathed out of the bucket. So at that time, December of '75 in Delhi, it was quite cold in the mornings, and Prabhupada, what was I just saying?
Bathing in the morning.
Oh, bathing. Yes, so what we were supposed to do was put a bucket of warm water and a bucket of cold water, and he would mix the two together to get the right temperature. So at the beginning of the massage, I was so intent on doing the massage, I completely forgot about the water. So when we stopped, Prabhupada stood up and said, "So where's the water?" So that was my first blunder on the very first day. Prabhupada had to wait for another 10 minutes till he got some hot water. So there are lots of opportunities to commit offences, knowingly or unknowingly. I was aware of the fact that some of the other previous servants and secretaries, they had left their service sometimes because after travelling with Prabhupada, after some time they started taking him for granted. And, more or less treating him like an ordinary man. So I was very conscious, that others would have difficulties from, treating Prabhupada or seeing Prabhupada as if he was an ordinary man, or let's even say an ordinary Vaishnava. Prabhupada was exceptional in every respect, so I always wanted to keep that respectful mood. But at the same time, you got this chance to be with Prabhupada in, circumstances that you didn't normally find yourself in, and Prabhupada would be very relaxed. Sometimes he would chat about different things that were happening in the movement. Sometimes he would tell us about, his previous life before he started ISKCON. So it was a unique situation, and I happily accepted it. And apparently Prabhupada was very happy with it. Later on, he told Harikesh that he gave me a good massage. So that was a recommendation. So I did the massage for about 3 or 4 days. We went to Kurukshetra for a day. That was interesting. We might mention that later on. And then from Kurukshetra that one day, the next morning, we drove to Vrindavan. And then I was supposed to switch over with Prithuputra. And he was going to do the massage, and I was supposed to go to Calcutta. But when Prabhupada found out Harikesh had changed the arrangement, he wasn't happy. So that was it. I was told, get your bags and move in. because when we arrived, of course, at the temple, Prabhupada went straight into the temple room, greeted the deities, had his Guru Puja, and then he gave his class. And then he came out, he went into his rooms, then Hansaduta followed him, Harikesh followed him, and I was left standing outside. But not, you know, as I say, I was still very happy with the events that had happened. But when we were in Kurukshetra, actually, they put Prabhupada up, the organisers, in like a motel. It was just for like half a day. And Prabhupada took his massage there. So after his massage, I was cleaning up. I didn't know that Prabhupada would drop his gumshoe into the bucket. So I didn't look inside the buckets that were there. And then when we got back to Delhi, I realized they, lost Prabhupada's gumshoe. So the next morning when we went to Vrindavan, the first thing they did was take a rickshaw with Prabhu Puja down to Loi Bazaar. And I got a new gumshoe for Prabhupada, and at the same time I told Prabhu Puja all the things that had happened in the last few days. Because we were friends, we'd been in the Vrindavan temple for a few months. So he was as excited as I was. But I stayed excited. Sorry, Prabhupada objected. Very sorry, get your stuff moved in. So anyway, I moved in. So we had 12 days there doing Prabhupada's service, personal service. And by about 7 or 8 days, I had lost the mood that, I'm just so grateful just to have these few days. I started to think, well, what about if I had it all the time? Yeah, I'd been the temple commander, but I'd gotten into some dispute with the temple president, Bhaktivedanta Swami at that time, so he sacked me. He sacked me from being the temple commander. So I found some other service. When Prabhupada had come in the mid-year, they just finished publishing the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So Ramananda was the secretary, and I saw he had the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the volume dealing with Rathayatra and the cleaning of the Gundicha temple. And because I was the temple commander, and Prabhupada had a high standard for keeping things clean, so I borrowed that, portion that describes about the cleaning of the Gundicha temple, and read it. And then when I got sacked a few weeks later, I still went ahead. I bought a big hose pipe. They have these wooden, moving trolleys in Vrindavan for doing the ceilings and stuff, so I got a couple of those. And then we spent a week or so just from the back to the front, side, ceiling, everything, brushed it all down. It was just the wall where in front of the deities where the doors were. And then, of course, Prabhupada came. So I stopped for a couple of days whilst I was in Delhi, unexpectedly. And somebody else took over the finishing of the cleaning of the temple. So anyway, I was there, and I kind of progressed from just being grateful that I got 1 or 2 days to touch and massage Prabhupada to the mood that, this is the service that I really want to do for the rest of my life. This is it. I'm never going to get this opportunity again. But I didn't want to disturb Srila Prabhupada. So I spoke with Hansaduta and Harikesh. By this time, Harikesh had accepted that I was doing a good job, so we became friends. So the two of them, they said, well, go and ask Prabhupada if you can stay on the party. Because apparently in mid-December, after that trip to Vrindavan, Prabhupada was going to go down to Bombay, and Nitai was getting some visa work done there. He was going to rejoin the party. So I was massaging Prabhupada, and I plucked up the courage, and I told him that, these last few days having this opportunity to personally serve you, I really would love to, could continue doing that. So Prabhupada thought for a second, and he said, what languages do you speak? I told him, I said, God, Krishna wants me to go to Calcutta to be the temple president, but actually I'm not qualified. So Prabhupada asked me, what was your level of education? So I told him I went as far as a grammar school, and I was brought up in England. So they had, junior school and high school, or grammar school. So I've been to the grammar school level, but I didn't want to go to university. So then Prabhupada asked, what languages do you know? I said, I only know English. So he thought about it. Then he said, go and fetch Harikesh. So when Harikesh came up, Prabhupada told him, so he wants to stay with me and be my servant. What do you think? So Harikesh gave me a glowing review. I think this is an excellent arrangement. Hari Sauri does a good massage. He's doing well. Nitai's just going to come back on the party, and after another 3 months he'll leave again, as he's done several times. But if you have Hari Sauri with you, you'll have a permanent servant. So Prabhupada, all right, good. So then I was in ecstasy. That was what I thought was the end of the thing. But actually what happened was that once we left Vrindavan, we went back to Delhi for 2 days. And Prabhupada was trying to find people, qualified people, to translate his books into Hindi. So he put some adverts in the newspapers, Gopal Krishna did. And different people were coming to see Srila Prabhupada, and he would talk with them. And then he would give them a section in the Bhagavatam, first couple of pages, something like that. Tell them to translate it and bring it back, and he could see what the level of understanding was. And the reason why he did this was, he said, because in India 99% are all Mayavadis. So he said, I have to check every word, because if they alter it, we may end up with something which is not Bhakti Yoga. So on the second night, about 9 o'clock, all people had gone. There were people there for darshan. They left, closed the doors, and then there was a knock, and we opened the door. This gentleman was there about the translation work. So Prabhupada called him in and asked him what his background was. And it turned out he got his PhD in Chaitanya Vaishnavism. That was his, So Prabhupada was very interested. This man may be very useful. But it was already 9 o'clock at night. He didn't want to stay up talking with him any longer. And besides that, he wanted to see what he could do. And the next morning, Prabhupada was flying down with his party to Bombay. So he asked him, he said, I can't do it now, but can you come to Bombay with us? So he said, yes. But he said, I have no money. So Prabhupada called Harikesh, and Hazadutta was sitting over here. The guy was in the front, Harikesh was there, and I was at the side of Prabhupada. And Prabhupada asked Harikesh, what tickets do we have? So I said, well, there's yours, there's Hasadutta's, there's mine, and there's Hari Sauri's. So Prabhupada didn't even look at me. He said, so give him his. Harikesh looked at me, what can be done? So it looked like, what I've been building up to and finally achieved in getting accepted as Prabhupada's servant was now all undone. Fortunately, I was very dull. My brain's a bit dull very often, and I didn't understand really what was going on. Harikesh, Hasadutta, they looked at me, too bad. But I was thinking, okay, so my ticket's been given to this guy. I'll buy another one tomorrow to the airport, and I'll still go down. I didn't understand that I wasn't supposed to be there anymore. So we went off to the airport, and they boarded the airplane, the 4 of them. We watched them off. And then I went straight up to the ticket counter, bought another ticket for a couple of hours later, and then I flew down to Bombay. So when I arrived there was a tiny little airport, Palam. I don't know if anybody remembers that. But when I arrived there, I took a motor scooter. And I arrived there just at the time when Prabhupada was just finishing having his massage. And in those days, the temple was under construction. And at the back of the land, there were some apartment buildings, 2 floors. So Prabhupada had 1 floor on the top of one of those buildings. I found out where he was. I'd never been to Bombay before. And I went up to his rooms. So as I walked in the door, Srila Prabhupada had to come out from a small veranda that was there. He just finished getting his massage. He was just going to go to the bathroom, and he saw me at the entrance. And he said, "Oh, Hari Sauri, you're here. All right, very good." So I'd offered my obeisances, and then I thought, why did Prabhupada say that? And then Nitai came through the door. I knew Nitai he'd been in the Vrindavan temple for 3 months, so we were friends. So he saw me and he said, "Oh, Hari Sauri, you're here." He said, "All right, that's good. I wanted to go back to Vrindavan anyway, to do the Gurukul and obviously the pujas." And then Harikesh came through and said, "Hari Sauri, what are you doing here?" Then I finally twigged that I wasn't supposed to be there. When he'd given my ticket away, they all assumed, well, that's it, Hari Sauri doesn't get his chance. Because I was dull, it saved me. So don't be worried if sometimes you don't quite catch what's going on. Sometimes Krishna doesn't want you to know. If I'd have understood that, I wasn't supposed to have a ticket anymore, I would never have flown down there. So anyway, I got down there, and that was it. So I ended up spending 16 months with Prabhupada. We went on the last world tour, spent 1 year in India, 4 months overseas. So anyway, the diary. So I had been, as I say, keeping up the diary. And later on, in mid-year, I understood this is not just for me, this is a historical document. You don't get this chance to write up a biography of someone, by living with them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Nobody does that. So it was a unique opportunity, and I was eager to take it on at least. So I did manage to keep a diary for the whole 16 months. And after I left Prabhupada's personal service in March of '77, Tamal Krishna Maharaj had come on at that time as the permanent secretary. So I was feeling that I needed to have a break. The reason why it became clear to me later on that Prabhupada's Leela was changing, and so there was a corresponding change in his servants. Tamal Krishna came on as Prabhupada's full-time secretary, and I left to go and do some preaching in Australia, and Prabhupada sent me there. So anyway, in March '77, I left, I think on the 13th of March, and before I left, I told Tamal Krishna Maharaj, Maharaj, I've been keeping a diary, the whole period I was with Prabhupada. So, and it really hit me now that I was going to leave the party and go back to Australia to do some preaching. Who's going to keep up the diary? Because there were so many things that happened which are not recorded. Or even if you heard a recording of it, you wouldn't know the context and the background and things like that, the people involved. So it was a unique opportunity, and if you didn't write it all down, all that would be lost. And I told him, I said, what have we got from previous servants? We had no information what Prabhupada was doing a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Nobody wrote it down. We just got the recordings and that's it. And Prabhupada's letters. So I told Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I really, really think you should take up where I left off and keep a diary. I'm very busy. Prabhupada at that time was extremely ill. That was really, the last part of his, appearance. From that February until the end, he was just getting sicker and sicker. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj, of course, was very, very busy. But I, kind of trying to pressure him as much as I could. I said, Maharaj, this is so important. I need to know what Prabhupada's been doing. The devotees need to know. Oh, well, okay, maybe. But they wouldn't commit. I flew out. I flew back to Australia at the end of March. And then Prabhupada, he was in India. He went to Rishikesh. Well, he went to London. No, he went to Rishikesh first. And they were there for a few days. I think this was in May of 1977. And then all of a sudden, Prabhupada called Tamal into his room and said, I want to go immediately back to Vrindavan. I may leave my body. So they packed up everything in an hour, jumped on a boat, went over the other side, went straight back to Vrindavan. All the GBCs were called from all around the world. And I was, by that time, the GBC for the South Seas. After I'd left Prabhupada's party, there was a vacancy there. So Prabhupada sent me back to Australia and I made the GBC about a month later. So we all gathered there. And then somehow or another, although Prabhupada had his will written, legal document, he'd never done that before. And although he was very weak, somehow or another he kind of pulled through the immediate crisis. So whilst I was there, I told Tamal Krishna Maharaj that I would like to be Prabhupada's visiting GBC secretary for the month of October. Because Prabhupada's system was that he had a permanent secretary, and then any GBC, they could come for 1 month at a time, just to have Prabhupada's association and be trained up more in the finer arts of Bhakti Yoga. So Prabhupada was there in Vrindavan. Tamal was there, and I saw that he was keeping a diary. So I was very happy with that he realized. And if you see his TKG's diary, that's the name of the book, you must read that. Then you'll see there that begins around about mid-April. I left Prabhupada's personal service in mid-March. So then there's a gap of a few weeks, and then Tamal Krishna Maharaj took up the task of keeping the diary because he finally realized how important it was. So that was it. Of course, that situation remained as it was. I went back to Australia in June, and then after a couple of months, then I was due back for my stint as the GBC secretary for the month of October. And of course, what happened there was that Prabhupada by that time was really physically finished. His body was just skin and bones, but he was in perfect consciousness. And the first night that I arrived in Bombay was September the 29th, I think, just at the end of September. I was going to be there for the month of October. So the day that I arrived, I got there about 3:30 in the morning. I got rested up and everything, and then in the evening we got a message from Tamal Krishna Maharaj that he wants to see all the leaders, all the GBCs, sannyasis. So there was about 8 or 9 of us, temple presidents, like Giriraj was the president in Bombay. And Prabhupada asked us whether he should stay in Bombay because they were getting close to an opening date for the new temple, the Jubilee Beach temple, probably another couple of months, and then it would be at least operable. Or, he said, should he go back to Vrindavan? So each one of us individually had to say what we thought. When it came for my turn, I had just arrived, I wasn't quite tuned into everything that was going on. And so I asked, is it for health or is it for preaching? Two things, it's one or the other. So Prabhupada said it is for health. So then I voted, okay, we should go to Vrindavan. And everybody else did except Gopal Krishna Maharaj, because he was anxious that if Prabhupada goes to Vrindavan, all the devotees are just going to immediately drop everything and go to Vrindavan to be with him, because we knew, what may happen. We were hoping it wouldn't, but so he was concerned that the work on the temple would stop. But that was not a consideration, as it turned out. So I was deputed by Tamal Krishna Maharaj to fly back to Delhi, make some arrangements in Vrindavan to receive Srila Prabhupada, and then report back. So myself and I took the last plane in the evening. I stayed at the Delhi temple. At that time, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhu was the president. He was from Australia, so I knew him. And the next morning we went out. He had one friend at the temple, and he was a furniture supplier. And they made furniture on the spot in his house. So we went to see him, and he had one bed, a double bed, which is what we wanted. And he had this one bed, so that's the bed that's in Prabhupada's rooms there, you'll see when you got Vrindavan. And we got double thickness cotton mattresses. Prabhupada didn't like the sponge or anything. And a few other things. And then I rang up Tamal Krishna Maharaj. I told him, okay, we're ready. So that same night, there was another friend in Bombay, Mr. Gupta, who was very high up in the railway system. So he immediately, like within a couple of hours, arranged for a whole carriage to be added onto one of the trains, and Prabhupada came up in there. So he came up to Vrindavan the very next day. And then, of course, he spent the last 6 weeks of his appearance in Vrindavan. So when I arrived there, and of course, as I said, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was keeping his diary. So I kept another diary, separate from the first one. The first diary, which I gave the title Transcendental Diary, some of you may have seen that. And there's 5 volumes there so far. There was that, but what was I going to say?
Separate diary.
Yeah, so that separate diary, I kept up to the end of the month. I took that back to Australia with me. I didn't read it for 30 years. I put it in my trunk, and I thought, well, when I publish the first diary, then I'll do this last one. So I have 2 separate diaries. The Transcendental Diary was, the experience of being a servant with Prabhupada, and the other diary, which I think I'll probably call Back to Vrindavan. That one was only for 1 month, and I was there as Prabhupada's GBC secretary as well. So the last few months I've been working on transforming that second diary into a book. I hope that I'll get it finished by the end of this year. I find writing to be a very difficult occupation. I'm not a natural writer. I was much more of a physical temple commander guy. But now we're getting old. I have so many friends that are leaving. I was just with Shravanananda Prabhu last year. He was one of the first devotees to come down to Madras. He was TP there when Prabhupada went there in January 1976. He just left his body. I know 4 or 5 people this year that have left their bodies. And I've realized I've got to get serious about getting this stuff written down. Otherwise it's going to be lost. So I'm working on that second diary right now, October 1977. When I've completed that, then I'll come back to do the last 2 volumes of Transcendental Diary. So that's a quick brief, give you some background information to put all this into context. So what I've done anyway, as I say, is that a few years ago, I saw that Shruta Kirtikalu, who was Prabhupada's servant for at least 2 years, and he's the one that we learned, all the tricks of the trade, as they say. So I saw that he was being invited regularly in the summertime to go and speak about Prabhupada at different venues. So I thought, well, I got so much information here, I'm not doing anything with it. I should do the same. So I just put the word out that I was available, and I developed this seminar, which we're going to be looking at for the next few weeks, a few days. Maybe that was somebody else saying that. But so I gave it a name, Srila Prabhupada, the Living Bhagavatam, because we got those phrases from Prabhupada, of course. There's the book Bhagavad and there's the person Bhagavad. So Srila Prabhupada was the living Bhagavatam. And that's the way that I always viewed him. And everything that he did, said, acted on, it was all perfectly Krishna conscious. So I gave that seminar that name. And what I'll do now is I'll just read the introduction. And if there's a little time, we'll do some questions and answers. And then tomorrow, I have about 9 different topics, mainly from my own diary, where I've collected up, by theme, rather than just going chronologically as a diary does. Chanting, cleanliness, deity worship, so many different aspects. So I've compiled them into separate seminars. And what I'll do is I'll read out the titles of the subjects that we've got tomorrow, and everybody can vote. And whichever topic gets the vote, that's what we'll talk about. There are other ways that we can do it. We can do a bit from each one every day, a different aspect. But that doesn't get you as deeply into it as doing one subject, for a few days. But we'll see tomorrow when everybody likes. So, this is written, and it began December the 2nd, 1975. The first day that I became Prabhupada's full-time servant. So I moved my stuff into Prabhupada's quarters. Those of you that have been there in the personal quarters of Prabhupada, there's the big darshan room in the front. To the left, there's the prasad, what used to be the prasadam room. To the right, and outside of Prabhupada's darshan room, there's that small room in the corner, and that was where the servants stayed. And Prabhupada's bedroom was at the back. So I moved my stuff in, and I got my first chance to, be alone with Prabhupada. Harikesh was doing something else, Sauri was doing something else. So I was just there with Prabhupada and nobody else. And most of the times when Prabhupada was by himself, which was not very often, there was always somebody coming and going. But when he was alone, then he would generally have his beads out and he would be chanting. So this particular day, the first day with him, I came in after lunch. Prabhupada had his meal, and he was sitting and chanting a little bit, and he was very quiet. So I just sat in the corner and just observed him, just looking at him. And so I've written the experience, and I had a little realization whilst I was sitting there. So it's extremely pleasurable to be with Prabhupada during these quiet moments. He's gentle and mild in his manner, and completely fixed and steady in his devotion to Krishna. He has tremendous strength and force, but he is devoid of passion. His presence is totally dominating without being at all domineering. His mind is steady, and his senses are controlled effortlessly. His intelligence is perfectly clear, and he knows how to act and how others should act in every situation. His presence thus makes spiritual life a reality. Watching him today, it struck me that he is a living, breathing Bhagavatam. Whatever description of Krishna consciousness is in his books, he is that. I really strongly realize that everything we read in Prabhupada's books, which will take us, and I put it in, what is understood in several lifetimes of study is revealed on a second-to-second, minute-to-minute, and day-to-day basis in Prabhupada's personal association. I've therefore resolved within myself to learn as much as I can while I have this matchless opportunity to observe him closely. Simply watching Prabhupada in his daily activities, how he deals with devotees, how he responds to different situations, how he preaches, how he manages the worldwide affairs of his ever-expanding society, how he relaxes, how he continually pushes forward the movement of Lord Chaitanya, how absolutely every facet of his being is fully Krishna conscious. It's quite feasible then to understand the full import of the sacred scriptures. By studying and preaching, one may make steady advancement, but at least for me, although I have full faith in Krishna consciousness, many ideas and principles are still only intellectually perceived, but not yet fully realized. But by observing Srila Prabhupada, I can see that they are a natural, integral part of his very being. So that was a nice view of the Krishna, again, a little peek. That I was just looking at Prabhupada, and he wasn't just chanting with his eyes closed, but I understood that the entire Bhagavatam, all the meanings, and, all the record of, heavenly planets or whatever, spiritual life, it's all there in this one small, seemingly small human being, Srila Prabhupada. And the first time I saw Prabhupada actually, physically, was in 1972. I just joined the temple in Sydney, and there was about 10 devotees. And in Melbourne, I think they just started a new temple there. There was about 5 or 6 devotees. That was it. That was the whole Australian yatra. But somehow or another, Prabhupada went there every year. First time was 1971. And at that time, I wasn't a devotee. I had just emigrated from England to Australia. We got there in the middle of May 1971. We got off the boat. We went by boat, it was 1 month's journey. And we got off in Sydney. And the first day out, we were walking around the streets, me and a couple of friends that came with me, school friends. We decided we wanted to get out of England and go and see Australia. So as we were walking around the streets, I hear this ching, 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 some singing. I didn't know what's going on. And we came to the crossroads, one of the main streets. There was about half a dozen devotees there, doing kirtan. And most people were ignoring them. And the friends that I was with, we met a few more new friends on the boat. There's about 10 of us. We were standing right next to them, but I was the only one that turned and looked to see what was going on. And I was immediately attracted. I didn't know what it was, I'd never seen anything like it. But there was something about these people that they were somewhere else. They weren't in the city, they were somewhere else. And I was at that time going through a tremendous psychological changes in my life. I was 20 years old. And I had no idea what life was about, what I was meant to do or not do. So all these issues were coming up, and it was becoming like a crisis for me. And I was trying to figure out what is going on, what is life? Why are we here? Why do we have to die? And it was really the only thing that I could talk about anymore. So I was kind of, I guess, looking back, I was kind of right through for the picking. So I brought it back to Godhead. They were on each street corner. One of the girls or one of the brahmacharis, they had stacks of magazines, Back to Godhead. They were offering them to the passerbys. Nobody was buying them. I stopped. I bought my first Back to Godhead. It was number 37. It had the Rasa Leela on the front. So I'm looking at what's going on here. People floating in the air, dropping flowers. Couldn't figure out what it was. But I gave 20 cents, and I was invited to come to the Sunday Love Feast. which I was thinking, Sunday love feast, what does that mean? Coming from England, we had this like medieval background, right? The last few hundred years, the knights in armor, and this vision on films, they would have like a gigantic table with a pig's head on it and apples and like that. That was the Europeans. So I was thinking, Sunday love feast. That's the only thing I could relate it to was a feast. I was thinking, what is this? Anyway, we went back to this hostel that we got like 1 week free or something. Go out and get a job, find a place to live, and then back to, So we didn't like Sydney. We decided we wanted to go back and see Perth. So I had this magazine, and although I hadn't read it, and when I opened it and looked at it, I could not understand one single word. I just wasn't ready at that point, but I was looking and there was a line drawing of Narada Muni. I was thinking, who's this woman? But they put long hair, this very beautiful face. I thought it must be a woman. I tried to read something, but the Sanskrit, it just completely threw me. But for some reason or another, I couldn't let go of it. I was packing up, ready to go to Perth, but I had this magazine. I was going to throw it, then I thought, no, this is an important literature. I'm going to come back to this at some point in the future. I knew it, so I kept it. Then we went off back to Perth. It was a 3-day bus trip. Nearly killed me. And half the road at that time in Australia from Adelaide to Western Australia was about 400 miles. And it was not an asphalt road, it was a dirt road, so the bus was bouncing and shaking. Anyway, we got to Perth. From there we went up to a place called Paraburdoo. It's up in the northwest where all the mines are. So we ended up going up there. We got jobs in the mines, not in the mines, on the top we were. And we stayed there for 6 months. But every now and again, I would take this back to Godhead out, and I tried to read it. And every time that I took it out, I understood a little bit more. Until finally I twigged on that, it's not just talk, it's action as well. And Prabhupada, of course, is saying, just chant the Hare Krishna mantra. This is the best, easiest form of yoga. I'd become interested a little bit in yoga before we left England, but I didn't know anything about it. And I'd read one yoga magazine, typical Mayavadi nonsense, all Hatha yoga. And then there was one article, philosophy, so-called, about meditation, how to meditate. So they had a picture of a guy sitting down, so where you are, and there's a table with an apple up on the top here. And then that was their meditation. You sit down, you look at an apple on the top of the table. Now you're a yogi. Even I could understand this is completely bogus. So I wasn't at all attracted to that. But when we got to Australia, then I got this BTG, and finally I started learning something. And every time I read it, it was something new. There were things that I had been thinking about, but I had no information about. Prabhupada just revealed it all, and just even in one BTG. So I kept that with me, and when we went up into the north for the 6 months, I would take it out now and again and read it, and get a little bit more. I got to a point after 5 or 6 months where I thought, I'm wasting my time here just trying to earn money. I've got to get back to Sydney and find these people. They know what's going on. Whatever's in this magazine, I'm sure they know more. So I left all my friends, flew down to Perth, took a cross-country hitchhike back to Sydney, and it took me about 4 days to find the devotees. They were out every day, but I couldn't remember where I'd seen them the last time, and they were always changing where they were. So I got an apartment or a house that I was renting just nearby the city, and I was walking out every day for a couple of hours, hoping that I would bump into these people, the devotees, on the street. And after 4 days, I heard the singing again, and I ran up the street, and there they were. So I found out where the temple was, and I joined. And so that was, February 1972. So Prabhupada had already been one time to Sydney in 71. Just the week that we had landed off the boat from England, Prabhupada was there in the city, but I didn't know, of course, and even if I did know, I wouldn't have understood it at that point. But the following year, Prabhupada came again, 1st of April 1972, and I was in the temple. I was freshly shaved up. I'd been a full-time devotee for about 6 weeks, and then Prabhupada came. So naturally, we were all tremendously excited. We had literally given up everything in our lives on, Prabhupada's word, that what he's giving is much more valuable. So we walked away from everything. I remember when the night that I shaved up, I've been going since mid-January. I've been visiting the temple. And then in mid-February, there was one devotee, his name was Hanuman, he was a French Canadian. So he was one of the senior devotees. He'd been in the movement for about 2 years. The temple president, Mohanananda, he'd been in the movement a couple of years. He was 19 years old. And, there was nobody in the temple that was older than 28. And the guy that was 28, he was like an office worker, but he'd gotten attracted. And we thought, wow, this guy's really old. He's 28 years old. We were all like 19, 20, 21 years old. Anyway, so we were building up. Upendra was there. And we were getting very anxious to see Prabhupada, but we were also a bit anxious as to whether Prabhupada would actually live up to our expectations or our hopes. Would he be as fantastic as he appeared to be in his Back to Godhead magazine? So there was a bit of, we'd literally given everything away. From working up in the north in Australia, I saved about $1,600, which at that time was enough to buy a new car. It was, not a small amount. And when I joined the temple, I understood everything belongs to Krishna, so I just gave him everything. I had about 50 LP records, all my clothing, everything, all my money. So we were, giving up my friends, because naturally they didn't want to join. And they left Sydney and went somewhere else. So my whole life was just, disintegrated by meeting Srila Prabhupada. So we were anxious to see, is he going to be everything that we hope, and everything that he's made out to be in these books. So he arrived on April the 1st. I got shaved up 6 weeks before. I think it was St. Valentine's Day. I remember. So Hanuman, he was there, this French Canadian, and every day he saw me, doing some work, and he would come up and grab me by the hair, and I had long hair at that time down to my shoulders. You've seen these pictures of Radhanath Maharaj? Like that. Everybody had their hair like that. So he used to grab me by the hair and say, when are we going to take this off? So I'm telling him, when my friends come from the north, because they'd written and told me, now we're coming to Sydney, we'll join up there. So I told him, when my friends come, then you can shave me up. So one day, I went off to the temple. I'd received a letter from them, and they were due to arrive, I think a day or 2 days afterwards. And so as soon as they got to the temple, Hanuman was there. He did his usual, when are we going to take this off? And I said, well, you can do it now if you like. So that was it. They whipped me off into the bathroom, And 10 minutes later, I was all nice and fresh, shaved up. I went back to the place I was staying. My friends were there. They opened the door. That's it. It's really serious. I told them, I'd actually found what I was looking for. And one of my friends, he told me, he said, you always hear about people looking to find the meaning in life, but you never hear of anybody that actually did it. But you've done it. I mean, he understood. I'd found, the answers that I was looking for. So that's the way it was. That's the way it did. Anyway, so that was it. I told him, tomorrow morning, I'm going to move into the temple. You can keep this place, pay or not pay. Here's all my record albums. Here's all my clothes. The money, of course, I gave to the temple. And the next morning, then Sauri Prabhu, who's the temple president in Spanish Fork in Utah, he's still there. And at that time, he was in Australia. So he drove me to the bank because it was funny how it happened, actually. I was just kind of walking through the front door and I heard Charu discussing with Mohanananda, the temple president, what to do because we had no money. And even though they were going out in Sankirtan every day, they only had back to Godheads to sell. And for a full day's book distribution, you probably come back with $2. Some of the girls were a bit more active. They were getting $6 or $8 a day. But the temple was 3 months in debt. They had no money, so they couldn't pay the rent. They couldn't pay the electricity or anything. So they were trying to figure out what to do. And I just happened to walk past the doorway. And I stopped and I was listening in. And then they saw me listening. And what do you want, Prabhu? I said, well, you were just saying that you need some money, right? So they said, yeah. And I said, well, I've got some money. Oh, really? How much? Oh, about $1,600. Yeah! Mohanananda leapt up into apparently touched the ceiling, and he yelled out, Krishna! And of course he knew what was going on. Krishna was sending the money that they needed to keep them afloat. I was still so dull. I thought, why is he saying Krishna? I'm the one that's getting it. So later on I understood. Anyway, so I said, look, I've got this money that I earned whilst I was up in the mines, so you can have that. So they said, okay, well, where is it? I said, it's in the bank. I'll just go to the bank tomorrow morning. I'll close the account and give it to you when I come back. Oh, no need to do that, Prabhu, we'll take you. Charu will drive you there in the van. I could see it was written all over their faces. This guy's offered this money. Now, when he leaves the temple, Maya's going to get hold of him and tell him not to give it. We'll never see him again. So they wanted to make sure that that we're going to get the money. So I knew what was going on, but I said, all right, no problem. So he came the next morning. He drove me to the bank. And when we walked in, of course, in those days in Australia, nobody had seen any devotees practically, except in Sydney. Then there was only a few of us. So I saw the bank teller, the lady behind the counter. I gave her my bank book. I said, I want to close this account down. So she looked at me, and she saw Charu was standing a couple of meters behind, kind of waiting. And she knew, he was waiting to get the money from me. And I was the sucker that was taking all my money and giving it to him. You can see a lot of people's faces. So anyway, she gave me the money. I turned around, dropped it into Charu's hands, and off we went. So that was like in February. Anyway, so Prabhupada finally arrived. 6 weeks after I joined the temple, and he stayed in Sydney for about 3 or 4 days. Then he went down to Melbourne for a couple of days, did some initiations. I think he installed a small set of brass Radha Krishna deities. Then he came back to Sydney for a few more days, and then he went on his way. So as soon as we saw him, that was it. Upendra actually, he had told me, the reason why he was there actually was because he had been the first devotee along with Bhaktivedanta Prabhu to come to Australia. So they had opened up Australia for preaching and he was still there. Bhaktivedanta had gone somewhere else. But so Upendra used to tell us stories about Prabhupada because he was his personal servant. So, I forgot what I was going to say about Upendra. But anyway, Prabhupada arrived on the 1st of April. And, that apprehension mixed with, the ecstasy of seeing Prabhupada, it was, kind of a totally different state of consciousness that I ever experienced before. And that was it. Upendra, he told me, he said, you wait when Prabhupada comes. He said, we talk about Krishna consciousness being the highest form of consciousness, but there is actually a higher form of consciousness than even Krishna consciousness. He said, what's that? He said, Prabhupada consciousness. So, okay, so we're all geared up, and then Prabhupada comes. We were late. Their flight had been changed by a couple of hours. We were all still getting ready to go to the airport in the double-decker bus that we bought with the money that I get at the temple. And as we're getting ready, this taxi comes, pulls up at the front of the temple, and out steps Pradyumna. Shaved head, kurta, dhoti, and then the back door opens and out steps Srila Prabhupada. And I just happened to be at the front on the road there when the taxi pulled up because I was cleaning out the bus to get ready to go to the airport. So as soon as we saw Prabhupada step out of the taxi, I immediately did a full-length dandavas in the middle of the street. Mohanananda was still getting dressed. The call went out, he's here, Prabhupada is here. And all the devotees came rushing out to see Prabhupada. Mohanananda comes running out, he's a TP, 19 years old. He's got red hair, so he's a bit of a passionate guy. And as soon as he sees Prabhupada, he says, oh, Prabhupada, and he throws his arms around Srila Prabhupada. Greeting an old friend, because he was greeting an old friend, but there was, some etiquette there. And then he realised he should offer his obeisances. Prabhupada just stood there, very patiently. Mohanananda offers his obeisances, all the temple devotees offer theirs. And that was it. And they immediately took him on a tour of the temple grounds. First, it wasn't very big, but they'd just been travelling for like 20 hours. But Prabhupada didn't say a word. He could see we're just very, rudimentary stage of development. He had installed Radha Gopinath. They were 22-inch high white marble. He had installed them the year before in 1971. So we did have deity worship going on. But Prabhupada told us later on in that second visit, he said that when I left Krishna here last year, I had to pray because I could see these boys, my dear sir, these boys and girls, they're seeing it, but they don't know what they're doing. And nobody actually knew how to worship deities. But Prabhupada told us, you just do it, the best you can. Krishna will give you the intelligence how to do it. And there was a few little books and pamphlets and things like that. So the second year that he came, which was my first meeting or experience of meeting him, he sat there on a new Vyasa stand that we constructed, and he looked at Radha Gopinath, and then he told us, he said, last year, I installed Radha Gopinath. I prayed to Radha Gopinath, please give them some intelligence so they can worship you nicely. I have to go to other places. I can't stay here and do it personally, so please accept whatever they offer. So he said that was last year. He said, now this year I've come, I can see that he has actually given you the intelligence to do things very nicely. The deities were actually gorgeously decorated and well looked after. That was one thing that we could do. So anyway, that was the first time I saw Prabhupada. And the thing that struck me, when he got out of the taxi and I was on the road there, was how small he was. Physically, he's only 5'4", so he's just small, frail, kind of looking personality. But when you looked in his face, there was real power there. You know, but, I mean, you knew Prabhupada. That was one of the things that I always liked about Prabhupada. No ifs or buts or maybes. You know, this is it. Bang, bang, bang. You know, Prabhupada told everything. There was no dodging it. You know, it was as it is, as he said. So that was, you know, a very attractive feature of Prabhupada. He was absolutely dead certain about everything that he spoke. It was all, you know, pure and, you know. Anyway, so he didn't look very powerful, but to manifest a movement like this, it's impossible. Nobody could do this, what Prabhupada's done. You know, now we have 600 or 800 centers. In those days, he had 1 or 2, 5 in America, a couple in Europe, Australia, like that. But the movement was growing very, very rapidly. We may deal with that later on. So nobody can actually estimate what Prabhupada did and how he would manage to do it. You know, at his age, I'm 69 in a month or 2. So just getting to the same age that Prabhupada was when he began his preaching overseas, because he tried preaching in Jhansi and in Vrindavan and Delhi for a number of years. But when ISKCON was formed, you know, so we couldn't see then what Prabhupada was doing. You know, but Prabhupada could see him. Now and again he would reveal things or he'd make little remarks. Like in 1977 we were at the Allahabad Kumbh Mela. It was supposed to be a full Kumbh Mela, you know, 144-year cycle or whatever it was. Anyway, we were there. The devotees, unfortunately, though, couldn't get like a decent pandal and facilities. They left it too late. So although Prabhupada wanted to go there for at least 3 weeks and preach with, you know, with a big pandal and get thousands of people in every day, it didn't happen because the devotees just somehow or another, they'd never done it really before. And the place that we got was far away from where all the action was. And so as a result of that, Prabhupada only stayed 3 or 4 days. But from there, we caught the train to Calcutta overnight. And Rameshwara Swami at that time, he was a GBC and he was in charge of the BBT also. So he's a very lively, dynamic personality. So he spent the whole night conversing with Srila Prabhupada about the future of the movement and so many different things. I took rest because I had my duties to perform the next morning. And you know. But there was one point where I was awake in the middle of the night, and Prabhupada told us, he said that history will record this time when the Hare Krishna movement saved the world. So very clear, very certain, the Hare Krishna movement is meant to save the world. And then in the future, historians, scholars, leaders, political leaders will recognize that. And just the other day I was looking at a short video at the Bhaktivedanta Manor in England, and they had the former Prime Minister, David Cameron, I think his name was. He came to this function and he was praising ISKCON up and down and praising Prabhupada personally. And how somebody, you know, his age could have possibly done so much work. People are amazed, actually. So we're very fortunate. We've come in at a time immediately after, or during the same time, or immediately after, in many of your cases, immediately after the appearance of one of the greatest acharyas of all time. And I do mean any of the other acharyas, because not that we were reducing the importance of other acharyas, but sometimes somebody does something so special, so unique, that it just, you know, puts everything else in the shade. And that was Prabhupada. he did something that nobody could do. So we're really, really fortunate that we've got this opportunity. Even, we're, separated by a little time, but the ISKCON movement's just beginning to grow. We have so much work that we have to do. Out of all the 7 billion population on this planet, how many of them are actually real devotees? Not many. Maybe a couple of 100,000, maybe 1 million, maybe 2 million. We haven't done a counter, but most of the people are in total ignorance. But it's getting worse. There's so many horrible things going on every day: murders, abortions, chaos. Even this issue now about protection for animals. They say something like 4 billion animals every year are slaughtered. And so there's a lot. This place is a mess. This material world, and especially where we are right now, it's not a place that you want to hang about in. As Prabhupada said, do your business and get out. So our business is to preach up until, as long as we're capable, and teach as many people as possible. And gradually, we'll see all the things that Prabhupada predicted will come true. And there will in the future be whole countries where their religion is Krishna Consciousness. It will come. But Prabhupada said it will not. We can only make that promise if you maintain the standards. He said, yes, the Krishna Consciousness movement will last 10,000 years, beginning from the appearance of Lord Chaitanya. But he said, only if you maintain the purity of this movement. If you deviate, then what can be done? It will be finished. So we've got a lot of responsibility, big and small, and it's very encouraging to come to a place like Salem, to see so many nice, bright faces, see your eagerness for chanting and hearing about Prabhupada. Shravanam Kirtanam, that's our business. Whatever else we may do, but Shravanam Kirtanam must go on. As long as we do that, Krishna's pleased, Prabhupada's pleased, and generations of Vaishnavas in the future will be pleased that we kept up the links and kept the preaching going. So it's 20 to 9. There's a couple of other, let me actually just. Do we have any more time? When do you want to stop?
Never.
It's eternal, but unfortunately this body is not. So, let me finish there's 2 pages here. Shall I read them or not?
Yes.
Okay, so on this point about the living Bhagavatam. In August of 1976, August the 5th, Prabhupada was in New Mayapur in France, and there was one gentleman, Professor Shanik, who was actually teaching something about Vaishnavism and Indian spirituality in the university in Paris, I think. Anyway, he was a big friend of the devotees. When they'd come out with the first French Bhagavad Gita, Tal Kale, he'd written a very nice, appreciative review. So in 76, when Prabhupada came to France, the devotees invited Professor Shanik to come and see Srila Prabhupada. And it was a lot different from, a lot of the scholars that Prabhupada had met on his travels here and there. Normally the scholars are usually a puffed up set of people. They're very proud of their learning and they know more than you. And they have kind of a patronizing attitude, many of them. But this professor was very humble, very nice, very appreciative. He actually put a dhoti on to come and see Prabhupada. He had beads around his neck. So it's very nice. And he had his teenage daughter with him. She was wearing a sari, they had tilak. So very, very respectful. So he was telling Prabhupada that he was very, the week before when we were in London, Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, who was in charge of the French or European BBT, they had published the first French Srimad Bhagavatam. So they gave that to Prabhupada. Prabhupada took it to France. And Shanik had already seen it when it came off the press. So they were discussing about this opportunity now with the French Srimad Bhagavatam. So the professor said that he was keen to see Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavatam come into use. It means that it would be used as text, reference text in the university. He said there's only one other French translation which was done in the 1800s, and that has no commentary. Yet at the university level, he said, the French are very meticulous about maintaining their grammatical standards of their language. He was politely concerned that our translations should not smell of English, as he put it. Because if you know anything about Europe, for the last 1,000 years, it's consisted really usually of the French fighting the English. They're always going back and forth, fighting each other. And so one of the things that the French is that they hate, when French words get kind of twisted into somehow like English words. They don't like it. They won't accept. They want to keep their language pure, as they say. So as the professor said, the translation should not smell of English. He felt that since our books are translated from English, the French literary expression is not always exactly correct. Describing French as a more compact language than English, he wondered whether it might not be better to translate directly from Sanskrit into French. So Prabhupada was not very concerned, whilst acknowledging that if possible, improvements could be made to future editions. He explained that as of yet, no French devotee had become a Sanskritist. But besides that, he said, it is not a question of scholarship. The translator must be a realized soul. He said that although there are many Sanskrit scholars in India, they cannot understand the Srimad Bhagavatam. He said the person must be French, expert in language, and at the same time a devotee. Then he can explain, otherwise not. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's secretary, Swarup Damodar, he asked that Bhagavat Padagiya, Bhagavat Stani, you go and study the Bhagavad from the Bhagavad. I have discussed this in the beginning of my translation of the Bhagavatam. So if you read Prabhupada's original Bhagavatam, there's a brief biography of Lord Chaitanya. So he put him in there on purpose, as you'll see in a second. So, Bhagavad, that is the limit of education. Vidya, Bhagavata Vadi. One has to study and take education up to the Bhagavatam. That is, if one understands the Bhagavatam, then he has finished his education. There's nothing more to be learned, because you already have it. The professor assured Prabhupada that he wasn't in any way criticizing, but he was concerned that Prabhupada would get the widest possible audience. He felt that an improvement in the way the French editions were written would ensure that. Prabhupada appreciated his concern, but he continued to stress his point. That is from the scholarship point of view, he said. But our point is that this Bhagavad must be presented by Bhagavad, and there is not so much scholarship required to do it, just like the Bhagavad begins with the words Janmadyasya Yata. So this Sanskrit word means the absolute truth, is from which everything emanates. Now, that absolute truth is further explained. Anavayat itaritascha abhigyan swarat, that the absolute truth is aware of everything, directly and indirectly, of this whole creation. So in this way, if you step-by-step study, it is not very difficult so far as the word meanings are concerned, but it is a question of realization. Unless one is realized, he cannot explain properly. This is the secret. Therefore, we have given the life of Lord Chaitanya in our Bhagavad because he is the living Bhagavatam. So Prabhupada himself used that phrase there about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Otherwise, it's just words. But if there's no practice, then you don't get anywhere. You can say you're reading the Gita, you can say you're reading the Bhagavatam, but unless you actually adopt the prerequisites, at least you have to be in the mode of goodness. If you want to understand transcendental topics, you cannot do that from Tamagun and Rajagun. You must be Sattvic, Brahminical culture. Yeah. And from the Brahman platform, then things are revealed more and more. So that realization, Krishna's in your heart, and when it's required from within, he can inspire you, he can give you, the answers to whatever it is that you need to know. So that's the real key to understanding the scriptures, and that's why Prabhupada was so successful. He had a godbrother who was touring in the West. He went there in the 1930s, 30 years before Prabhupada. Did nothing. Why? Because he was a scholar. He didn't go there to make devotees. He went there to get himself a name as a big scholar. And he continued to go to America and Europe in the 1940s and 50s, but he could never do anything. Just I know this professor, I know that professor, I've been to that university, nothing else. Prabhupada didn't bother with the scholars, so to speak, immediately, attracted whoever was interested in chanting. And anything that needed to be known, anything that needed to be rectified, chant. There was a cartoon once in America in a newspaper, and there's an old man and an old woman sitting on a park bench, and then there's 5 or 6 devotees, filling, cartoon style, but they're chanting, with the cymbals and drums. And the old lady, she's turning to the old man and she says, chant, chant, chant. And the old man replies, can't. So he said, this is the problem. He said, even you give them something so simple as chanting, but they can't do it. So if you want to get powerful chanting, then 2 things come in, hearing and chanting. Chanting purifies us, studying the literature, getting real meaning from it, that reinforces the chanting also. So that way then, that was Prabhupada's methodology. Whatever a person is, or whatever he was before, he told us actually when we were going to New Vrindavan in 1976, he said from the very beginning, he said, I took this idea that just get them to chant, get them to take prasadam. Yeah, come with us, sing, dance, take prasadam, and go home. No philosophy, just take prasadam and chant. Then when he's a little bit purified, he said, then you can start giving them some philosophy. So this is the philosophy, but it can only be realized by serious students whose hearts are being purified. But if you give it to some mundane, scholar or individual, they'll not make head nor tail of it. Or they'll write something offensive, as many have done with the Bhagavad Gita. You see, right from the very beginning, from 66 until Prabhupada's leaving, he was all the time, complaining, why you're distorting the teachings, why you're distorting Krishna as a person. It was one of his main themes, to restore Krishna to his true position as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, not as some historical figure or, some warrior or whatever. All right, so that's the last little bit here. This is May 7th, 1976 in Honolulu. Prabhupada went there for 1 month. When he was on tour in Europe and America and India, all the time, his time was always taken up with meeting so many people, dealing with so many managerial problems, etc. So in 1976, after the Vrindavan festival, Rameshwaran came to see Prabhupada about some BBT business, and he suggested, as Prabhupada apparently had done before, that when he leaves India, he go via Australia. From there, he goes to Hawaii, and he stays in Hawaii for at least 1 month, just to work on his books and nothing else. Nobody will come and disturb him. There's nobody to give darshan to. He gives a class in the morning, and the rest of the day he would work on his books. So this was on May the 7th. And I saw the amount of work that he did during this 1 month was about 6 times his normal amount. He had this dictaphone machine, and he had a little numbered dial, which tells you, how much tape was left. So on a regular night, maybe there was 50 digits or even less. When we got to Honolulu, he was doing up to 350 digits every day. And a few days he was working in the afternoon as well as the night time. And sometimes he completely skipped his evening massage and just went straight into his workroom and translated all night without sleeping. So it was a very productive period. So that's what we're picking up, May the 7th. Prabhupada is continuing to lead the repetitive chanting of the Sanskrit at the start of the Bhagavatam class himself. He skips slokas 3 through 5. This we'll be doing the 5th canto, I think. I might be wrong on that. Maybe 6, sorry. So this was the 6th canto. So he read out the morning's verse, 616, which describes Sukadeva Goswami as Mahabhaga. So here, Sukadeva Goswami is addressed as Mahabhaga. Maha means great, and Bhaga means fortunate. So because he is very fortunate, he is describing the Srimad Bhagavatam. Again, the Bhagavatam, the same word, Bhaga, comes. Bhagavat. Vat, this word is used when the meaning is in possession. So Astyartha, Vato, Bhagavan, Bhagyavan, and Bhagavat. So Bhagavat means one who has the power to possess the Supreme Lord. He is called Bhagavat. There are 2 kinds of Bhagavat. One is the Granta Bhagavat, and one is the person Bhagavat. A devotee, he is called Bhagavat. And the book in which the pastimes or characteristics of Bhagavan are described, that is also called Bhagavat. So this Srimad Bhagavat, Shri means beauty. Again, Vat. Bhagavat, Shrivat. Shri means very beautiful. So every sloka you will find is very, very beautiful. 5,000 years ago, these verses were written. There is no comparison. Nobody can write such verses even up to date. So it was written by Vyasadeva, Veda Vyas. So as we sat in the small but crowded temple room listening attentively to Prabhupada's potent lecture, it made me realize that as a Mahabhagavat devotee, Prabhupada is also incomparable. No one is able to give such astute insights into everyday life and such lucid explanations of the Vedic literature as he. He is truly the representative of Srila Vyasadeva, and we neophytes are Mahabhaga to be daily sitting at his feet. So that was the mood, that was the very social Prabhupada, Mahabhaga. So as Rabindra Prabhu told me last year, now we're building the Temple Vedic Planetarium. He said now we've got 3 Bhagavats. We've got the person Bhagavat, we've got the book Bhagavat, and we've got the temple Bhagavat. Because the temple is going to be a display of the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the whole temple is Bhagavat. Nice. All right, we're definitely finishing now. One quick question, or maybe 2. Any questions? No? All right, so I got some prasadam. Everybody's having or already taken?
Yes, we have some prasadam for everyone.
You haven't taken it yet?
Yeah, we have now on the way out, they will all get.
All right, good. So the prasadam's available. That's one thing that Prabhupada always insisted on, that whenever you have a gathering, you must distribute prasadam. It doesn't matter what you say or do, but you've at least got to give people prasadam, because that's practical purification. All right, so thank you all very much. We'll see you in the morning. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
His Grace Hari Sauri Prabhu ki jai.